"Close the door," Nigel said without looking up from his smartphone screen. I knew the second I stepped into that sterile, off-brand corporate conference room, with its faded gray carpet tiles and the distinct odor of someone's reheated seafood lunch, that something was profoundly wrong with this interaction. Perhaps it was the empty seat right beside him, the chair typically reserved for senior human resources representatives during annual performance evaluations. Or perhaps it was the smug, unearned grin plastered across his face, looking like a man who had just hit a long drive on a sunny country club golf course, rather than an executive preparing to evaluate the single person who had kept Kinetic Solutions' core back-end infrastructure from dissolving into a heap of corrupted databases and broken microservices. Nigel Powell was 34 years old, wore custom-tailored navy vests over crisp white dress shirts, and spoke entirely in corporate buzzwords he clearly picked up from superficial management podcasts during his morning commute. I was 53 years old, possessed more than 25 years of deep systems architecture experience, and had spent the last 3 years building every line of code holding this software company together. Nigel flipped open a manila folder with exaggerated slow motion, as though he were preparing to read an official obituary rather than a technical performance review. "We have reviewed your overall output over the past 4 quarters, Gavin," he began, his voice dripping with smooth, practiced condescension. "You keep the servers running, fine, you handle the maintenance. But let us be entirely candid with each other here. You are more of a traditional code monkey than anything else. You put your head down, your fingers clack on the mechanical keyboard, and you produce functional code. But great technical execution is not strategic thinking. We need visionaries, Gavin. We need agile leaders who think big picture, not someone glued to terminal screens all day." I sat motionless in my ergonomic leather chair, my hands folded calmly on my lap. I was 53 years old, a veteran software engineer who had built enterprise-grade cloud systems before Nigel was even out of middle school. This was the exact same company whose entire payroll processing module failed 3 years ago, until I spent 48 consecutive hours patching their legacy architecture from my kitchen table while nursing a high fever and applying a heating pad to my aching lower back. Back then, the co-founders had practically begged me to save their business from total collapse. Now Nigel was leaning back in his chair, interlocking his fingers behind his head as if auditioning for a promotional brochure on middle management arrogance. "So, given our tight operational budget for the upcoming fiscal quarter, we are passing on your requested salary increase. Furthermore, we are restructuring your department. Frankly, we need individuals who drive higher-level strategic value, not just maintenance workers who write code behind closed doors." I blinked once, keeping my facial expression entirely neutral and unreadable. The disrespect did not sting because it was surprising. It stung because of how predictable it was in modern corporate culture. In fast-paced technology environments, slick executives like Nigel routinely mistook quiet technical competence for docility. They assumed that because a senior engineer did not spend his mornings delivering flashy presentation, slides full of trendy jargon, his work was trivial, mechanical, and easily replaceable. That was when something deep inside my chest clicked into place. It was not a loud snap of explosive anger or bitter frustration. It was a cold, precise, metallic click, like a heavy steel vault lock sliding securely into its groove. What Nigel Powell failed to understand was that I had not built Kinetics' back-end infrastructure as a standard W-2 employee. 3 years ago, when Kinetic Solutions was just 3 ambitious co-founders breathing startup hype in a tiny rented basement, they could not afford to hire a full internal engineering team. They had approached me with grand promises of equity that later vanished into thin air through clever corporate dilutions. Knowing the volatile and treacherous nature of early-stage corporate ventures, I had insisted on writing my own master services contract through my personal legal counsel. I agreed to construct their entire server infrastructure, authentication nodes, API gateways, database clusters, and scheduled background jobs through my independent corporate entity, Vance Tech Infrastructure, LLC. Crucially, Clause 14B of that proprietary licensing agreement explicitly drawn up under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106 governing copyrighted software architecture and exclusive intellectual property rights, specified that Kinetics was granted a non-transferable, non-exclusive operational license to run the back-end software. That software license remained legally valid solely during the active duration of my professional services agreement. Upon voluntary or involuntary termination of my contract, the software license automatically expired. I had made sure all three founding partners signed that legal document 3 years ago in the presence of a notary public. I had highlighted the exact clause in bright yellow marker, scanned the executed copy, and emailed it to my private secure server with a subject line titled for future reference when corporate hubris inevitably takes hold. Nigel slid a single sheet of printed paper across the polished mahogany conference table. We would certainly love for you to stick around during the upcoming transition phase. Of course, he added with a thin, patronizing smile. You are reliable, Gavin. Like a sturdy office printer or a well-maintained utility vehicle. You can help onboard the new talent we are bringing in from an offshore development agency. They operate at roughly half your cost structure, which aligns much better with our strategic financial goals, reliable. Like a toaster, a seatbelt, or a spare tire. Something you rely on until you convince yourself you can buy a shinier model, and then you toss it into a landfill without a second thought. I reached out, picked up the printed paper, and gave Nigel a curt, dignified nod. Thank you for your transparency, Nigel. I shall review this document very carefully, I said softly, my voice calm and even. He nodded back, completely mistaking my quiet composure for total defeat and helpless submission. That was the fundamental flaw with arrogant managers like Nigel Powell. They believed that silence indicated agreement. They assumed that a 53-year-old senior engineer who refrained from making an emotional scene was simply accepting his fate like a beaten dog. What Nigel did not know was that every database cluster, every encrypted token validator, every automated data pipeline, every customer-facing microservice running at Kinetics depended on a silent heartbeat verification protocol running on a private, off-site server owned exclusively by Vance Tech Infrastructure, LLC. One validation ping per day at midnight. If that heartbeat failed to receive valid authorization credentials, the entire back-end system would automatically lock down tighter than a federal nuclear facility. I walked back to my workstation in the quiet corner of the engineering floor with my heart beating steadily and my mind completely clear. There was not going to be an emotional outburst. I was not going to slam my keyboard, raise my voice in protest, or deliver an impassioned speech to the executive board about loyalty, dedication, and technical integrity. I was 53 years old. I had seen this exact corporate tragedy play out multiple times over the course of my long career. A company experiences moderate financial growth, executive management becomes arrogant, leadership decides senior engineers are an unnecessary expense, management attempts to replace decades of experience with cheap offshore contractors, and the entire technology stack implodes. The only difference this time was that I held the legal remote control to the entire digital building. I sat down at my desk, framed by 3 large monitors displaying humming terminal windows, active Docker container metrics, memory utilization graphs, and live server health dashboards. I opened my personal email client and drafted my formal resignation letter. I kept the language exquisitely polite, professional, and completely devoid of a single passive-aggressive word. My subject line read simply, "Formal notice of contract termination." I dated the final day of my employment exactly 13 days from that moment. Not 14 days, and not 12 days. Exactly 13 days. The significance of 13 days was rooted in pure mathematical precision. The annual automated license validation check for Vance Tech Infrastructure, LLC, was scheduled to fire precisely 14 days from that date at midnight. By setting my final day of employment 13 days out, my contract would legally terminate 24 hours before the license server initiated its annual validation sequence. The system would continue to run smoothly right up until the exact minute my legal agreement officially ceased. Once midnight struck on the 14th day, my authorization tokens would stand revoked in the master database, and the heartbeat check would fail completely. I pressed send on the resignation email, copying Nigel Powell, the Human Resources Department, and executive leadership. Within 10 minutes, Nigel strolled past my glass-walled office nook. He glanced at his smartphone, read the email notification, and gave a casual shrug of supreme indifference while taking a bite out of a cream cheese bagel. "All right, Gavin," he called out casually through the doorway without even pausing his walk. "We will get the offshore team posted and prepped right away." Seamless transition, right? I offered a slight courteous smile. "Whatever you deem strategic, Nigel." An hour later, a bright 24-year-old junior intern named Elliot Reed poked his head over my cubicle partition. Elliot was one of the few junior staff members who actually possessed a genuine passion for clean software engineering rather than corporate posture and buzzword bingo. His face looked pale, as though he had just been informed that the building's structural pillars were crumbling beneath us. "Mr. Vance, is it true?" he whispered nervously, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no managers were watching. "Are you really leaving the company in 2 weeks?" I looked up from my monitor and nodded warmly at the young man. "Yes, Elliot. My contractual tenure here has come to its natural end." Elliot stepped fully into the cubicle and lowered his voice even further. "But Mr. Vance, who is going to manage the continuous integration pipelines? Who understands the automated database migration scripts? Who knows how the legacy fallback routing schema works when primary user traffic spikes during peak hours? No one else on the internal team has ever even touched the core back-end repository architecture." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and gave him a calm, reassuring look. "Executive management assures me that the incoming offshore development agency will handle all of those responsibilities, Elliot. Apparently, they offer superior strategic alignment at roughly half the operational cost structure." Elliot looked thoroughly horrified. "But Mr. Vance, they do not even know what programming languages half our microservices utilize. I had an orientation call with their team leader this morning, and he asked me if Jenkins was an external third-party vendor or a physical server in our office." I chuckled quietly, placing a calm fatherly hand on the young man's shoulder. "Do not stress yourself over architectural decisions that lie far outside your scope of responsibility, Elliot. Focus on your own learning, keep your code clean and well documented, and make sure your personal professional portfolio is updated." Over the next 12 days, I did not alter a single line of production code. I did not plant any malicious scripts, I did not delete database tables, and I did not sabotage a single server configuration. To do so would be highly unethical and legally actionable. I operated strictly within the boundaries of legal compliance and professional standards. What I did execute was a comprehensive diagnostic audit for my own private records. I downloaded every server access log, every system performance metric, every architecture blueprint, and every deployment record to an encrypted external solid-state drive. I labeled the drive with a light-hearted label, "Old Grandfather Vanilla Cake Recipes," knowing that Nigel Powell would never dream of searching an external drive named after traditional baked goods. On my final afternoon at the office, Nigel introduced the new engineering leadership team during a mandatory department-wide meeting in the main auditorium. He stood beside a 31-year-old woman named Audrey Lawson, who wore expensive designer glasses, carried a sleek leather-bound tablet, and held the newly created title of Vice President of Global Engineering. Behind her, projected on the massive wall screen, 5 offshore contractors joined via video call, all smiling politely. Nigel clapped his hands together enthusiastically. "Everyone, this is the exciting new future of kinetic solutions. Audrey and her team are going to modernize our technology stack, eliminate legacy bottlenecks, and scale our cloud operations globally." Audrey stepped forward to the podium beaming with unearned corporate confidence. "We are going to aggressively disrupt our engineering paradigms," she announced, using every popular industry buzzword in existence. "We will be implementing full cloud-native agile transformation starting first thing Monday morning." I sat in the very back row of the auditorium, silently taking in the spectacle. They had absolutely no idea that the entire infrastructure they intended to disrupt was running on a proprietary software license that was set to expire in less than 12 hours. My final day concluded at 5 o'clock on a humid Thursday afternoon. I packed my personal desktop items into a modest cardboard box, my favorite ceramic coffee mug, a small potted desk succulent, and a framed photograph of my wife and children. I turned in my electronic security badge to the front desk receptionist, walked out to the parking garage, and drove home to my quiet suburban house. I made myself a fresh pot of dark roast coffee, sat down on my back patio, and listened to the evening breeze rustling through the mature maple trees in my backyard. I felt zero anger, zero anxiety, and zero regret. I felt the profound, serene calm of a seasoned master chess player who had set a checkmate 18 moves in advance. At precisely 11:59 that evening, I sat in my home study before my personal dual-monitor workstation. I brought up the remote telemetry dashboard for Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC's private authentication server. Across the city, the server racks at Kinetic Solutions were humming inside their third-party data center, processing thousands of customer database queries, executing automated billing transactions, and managing secure user logins for hundreds of corporate accounts. At midnight sharp, the digital clock flipped. The private validation server initiated its scheduled daily heartbeat check. It sent an encrypted data packet across the network to Kinetics's primary application cluster, asking one simple automated legal question. Is the proprietary licensing agreement for Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC currently backed by an active, valid service contract? The system checked Kinetics's active contractor registry database. The authorization key associated with Gavin Vance was flagged as legally terminated. The private license server received the response, logged the timestamp, and issued a single, cold, automated status code across the network protocol. Error 4003. License expired. Non-transferable authorization revoked under Title 17 United States Code. Section 106. There were no explosive alarms, flashing emergency lights, or loud sirens inside the Kinetics corporate offices. There was only the absolute instantaneous cessation of core software services. At 12 minutes past midnight, the primary load balancers stopped routing incoming network traffic because the underlying routing logic was no longer licensed to execute. At 12 minutes and 4 seconds, the user authentication portal flatlined, throwing invalid security credential errors to every user attempting to log into the application portal. By 12 minutes and 8 seconds, the automated database synchronization pipelines choked and halted. By 12 minutes and 15 seconds, the customer-facing web platform, mobile applications, and internal administrative dashboards simultaneously froze into complete uselessness. When the sun rose the following morning, Kinetic Solutions awoke to a catastrophic digital collapse. Every single automated alert in their system monitoring dashboard was flashing bright crimson. Customer service communication channels were overwhelmed by hundreds of urgent, angry emails and phone calls from enterprise clients who found themselves completely locked out of their corporate accounts on the first business day of the month. Inside the Kinetics corporate headquarters, absolute panic erupted across every floor. Nigel Powell had taken the morning off to attend a private golf clinic, leaving Audrey Lawson and the 5 offshore contractors to manage what they initially assumed was a minor technical glitch. Audrey stood before a large whiteboard in the primary executive conference room, frantically drawing red circles around complex server diagrams while sipping from an insulated tumbler that read, Tech Leader Boss. It is clearly a temporary domain name resolution caching failure, Audrey declared loudly to the gathered junior staff, her voice filled with nervous tension. Clear the local DNS cache across all server nodes immediately and restart the automated deployment containers. Elliot Reed, who had spent the last 2 hours analyzing the raw system error logs, raised his hand hesitantly from the back of the conference room. Vice President Lawson, I do not think it is a domain name resolution issue. Audrey frowned condescendingly at the junior intern. Elliot, please allow senior engineering leadership to diagnose complex infrastructure failures. Elliot did not back down. He walked firmly up to the main display screen and plugged his laptop into the HDMI projector. Look at the raw HTTP response body from the core API gateway, he said, pointing to a line of crimson text flickering on the wall screen. The server is returning an explicit, unalterable error code, error 4003. License expired. Exclusive intellectual property of Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC. Audrey stared at the projection screen, her eyes wide behind her designer glasses. What does Vance Tech Infrastructure mean? Is that a third-party software plugin we forgot to renew? Elliot pulled up a scanned PDF document from the company's secure legal archive directory. The exact document I had made sure was properly uploaded 3 years prior. It is Mr. Vance's private corporate entity, Elliot explained, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. 3 years ago, when the company was founded, the co-founders signed a proprietary software licensing agreement. Clause 14b explicitly states that Kinetics does not own the core backend architecture. We only held a non-transferable license that automatically expired upon the termination of Gavin Vance's contract. The license officially expired at midnight. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the executive conference room. Audrey turned deathly pale, dropping her white marker onto the carpet. We do not own our own core backend architecture. Elliot shook his head slowly. No, we leased it, and the lease just ended. By 10 o'clock that morning, the technical glitch had escalated into a full-scale corporate catastrophe. Major enterprise clients representing millions of dollars in annual recurring revenue were issuing formal legal notices, threatening immediate breach of contract lawsuits if platform access was not fully restored by the end of the business day. Kinetics' venture capital board members were blowing up executive phone lines, screaming at the chief executive officer and demanding to know why the company's core technology asset was suddenly dead in the water. Nigel Powell was summoned back from the golf course in a state of absolute terror. He rushed into the executive suite with his polo shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and sweat dripping down his forehead. "Where is the backup source code?" he screamed at Audrey during an emergency executive Zoom conference call. "Just deploy the backup repository to a new server cluster immediately." "We cannot," Audrey admitted, her voice trembling uncontrollably as she fought back tears. "The internal repository only contains front-end user interface code. The actual compiled back-end engine, database schemas, API authentication nodes, and microservice routing logic were hosted through Gavin's private infrastructure server. We do not possess the master encryption keys." "Call him," Nigel barked, slamming his fist onto the conference room table so hard his smartphone rattled across the mahogany wood. "Call Gavin on his personal cell phone right now." My smartphone began ringing at 11:15 a.m. while I was sitting comfortably on my back porch, enjoying a gourmet turkey sandwich while reading a historical biography of the American Industrial Revolution. I watched the caller identification screen flash, Nigel Powell. I allowed the call to ring silently and go straight to voicemail. 20 minutes later, my phone chimed with an urgent text message from Nigel. "Gavin, we are experiencing some minor migration bugs with the server deployment. We need you to jump on a quick 15-minute conference call to help the offshore team orient themselves. Please call me back ASAP." I ignored the text message completely. At 1:45 p.m., an official email arrived in my personal inbox from Kinetics' corporate legal department. Subject: Urgent Technical Assistance Request. The email was written in a tone of barely disguised corporate panic, offering to pay me my previous hourly rate for a few hours of emergency troubleshooting support. I waited until exactly 3 o'clock p.m. before typing my formal response. I kept my email short, precise, legally rigorous, and entirely professional. "Dear Nigel and executive leadership, thank you for reaching out to Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC. Please be advised that our firm is available to provide independent technical consulting services strictly under the following mandatory contractual terms. First, my emergency consulting fee is $475 per hour, with an absolute minimum engagement block of 80 hours, payable fully in advance. The total upfront retainer required to initiate consulting services is $38,000. Second, all technical consulting work shall be performed remotely on my exclusive schedule, with 0 non-disclosure agreements, 0 non-compete restrictions, and 0 assignment of liability. Third, Kinetics Solutions must execute a formal, written legal waiver confirming that Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC retains full, unassailable ownership of all underlying software intellectual property. Under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106, 4th, Vice President Nigel Powell must issue a formal written statement to the entire engineering department, officially retracting his previous characterization of my professional capabilities as just a code monkey. Please notify me if you wish to receive an official corporate invoice. Sincerely, Gavin Vance, Managing Principal, Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC. Nigel did not reply for 4 long hours. He reportedly spent those 4 hours frantically attempting to find an outside cybersecurity firm or software consultant who could breach or bypass my license validation protocol. However, every senior legal consultant and cybersecurity specialist they hired took one look at the proprietary licensing structure and informed Kinetic's executive management that attempting to bypass or hack the security wall would constitute a direct violation of federal copyright law under Title 17 of the United States Code, exposing the company to devastating statutory damages and criminal liability. At 7:30 p.m., my banking mobile application sent a high-priority push notification to my smartphone screen. Wire transfer received. $38,000 from Kinetic Solutions' corporate account. A minute later, an email arrived containing signed copies of all 4 contractual conditions, including a formal written memorandum signed by Nigel Powell apologizing for his unprofessional language and officially retracting his code monkey comments. At 9 o'clock the following morning, I arrived at the Kinetic Solutions corporate headquarters. I was dressed comfortably in a clean iron blue button-down shirt, dark denim jeans, and polished leather boots. I did not carry an employee security badge. I walked through the main glass entrance doors carrying a temporary visitor pass, clipped casually to my shirt pocket. The atmosphere inside the corporate office was utterly surreal. The entire floor was completely silent, save for the low hum of fluorescent overhead lights. Junior developers, systems administrators, and department heads watched me walk past with a mixture of quiet awe and profound embarrassment. Audrey Lawson sat inside her glass-walled office, with her head resting in her hands, completely humbled and silent. Nigel Powell stood near the break-room water cooler, holding a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, looking like a man who had lost 10 pounds in 24 hours due to pure stress. He met my gaze for a brief second, flushed bright red with shame, and quickly looked down at his shoes without saying a single word. I walked directly into the primary server control room, accompanied by Elliot Reed. "Mr. Vance," Elliot whispered with genuine admiration as he pulled up a chair for me. "I have never seen executive management move so fast to sign a legal agreement in my entire life." I smiled gently at the bright young man. "Never underestimate the absolute power of clear contractual boundaries and legal ownership, Elliot. Writing clean code is important, but understanding copyright law and contract structure is what truly protects your professional work." I sat down at the main terminal console. I opened a secure command line interface, established an encrypted remote shell session with Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC's license server, and entered the master administrative override keys. I issued a single terminal command to update the Enterprise Authorization Registry, renewing Kinetic's operational license for a temporary 30-day stabilization period. Instantly, the validation heartbeat ping returned a bright green status code across the network monitoring screen. Authorization verified. Active license confirmed. Across the building, monitors flickered back to life. Load balancers resumed routing. Incoming network traffic, user authentication portals reopened. Database synchronization pipelines cleared their processing queues, and customer error logs dropped to 0. Within less than 10 minutes, the entire enterprise platform was fully restored, running smoothly and flawlessly as if nothing had ever happened. I spent the next 2 hours generating a comprehensive, 84-page master architecture manual. I documented every microservice endpoint, every deployment script, every database index, and every failover routing protocol in meticulous detail. I saved the document as a portable document format file named Unnecessary Code Monkey Architecture Manual and uploaded it directly to Kinetic's shared network drive. At 12:30 p.m., I packed my laptop into my leather briefcase and stood up to leave. I had worked precisely 3 hours of my 80-hour prepaid consulting retainer. The remaining $36,525 represented pure profit for Vance Tech Infrastructure LLC for technical consulting services that Kinetics would never require me to execute again. As I walked toward the glass exit doors, Nigel Powell stepped out of his office nook. "Gavin," he said, his voice quiet, trembling, and completely stripped of his former executive bravado. I, I want to thank you for coming in so quickly to resolve this situation for us." I paused near the doorway, turning to look at him with total composure and dignity. "You are welcome, Nigel. Just remember in the future, true strategic thinking is not about slick buzzwords, corporate posturing, or condescending performance reviews. It is about understanding who actually built the foundation beneath your feet." What Nigel Powell and executive leadership did not know was that 2 weeks prior to my resignation, I had received a discreet headhunting inquiry from Apex Dynamics, Kinetics' largest and most formidable competitor in the enterprise cloud logistics sector. The board of directors at Apex Dynamics had offered me the executive position of Senior Vice President of Cloud Architecture, complete with double my former compensation package, substantial equity stock options, and complete technical authority over their engineering organization. I had signed their executive offer letter 30 minutes before walking into Kinetics' offices that morning. I set to begin my new executive role the following Monday. I had already begun drafting Apex Dynamics' next-generation cloud backend architecture, a platform that was faster, more secure, and infinitely more scalable than anything Kinetics could ever hope to deploy. I walked out of Kinetics Solutions into the crisp afternoon sunshine, feeling the warm breeze against my face. I had not burned a single bridge. I had simply enforced a legal contract under federal law, collected $38,000 for 3 hours of work, and stepped smoothly into the highest executive position of my professional career. As I unlocked my car and opened the driver's door, my smartphone chimed with a welcome message from the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Dynamics. "Welcome aboard, Gavin. We are thrilled to have a true strategic architect leading our engineering team into the future." I smiled, put my car in drive, and headed home.